proud of Royce. He's our official Poundonian storyteller. We're very eager to welcome up here Pamela Gilmer, who is going to present to us Edith Maxwell this afternoon. And in the interim of, wait a minute, is Oakley Dean back there? We need to go ahead and draw for that. That second belt buckle. And in the interim, while Royce was speaking, I think we have a guest that we might want to recognize showed up. Everybody who saw the movie last night, turn and look. Here is Frank Taylor. Frankie! Okay, let's. Yeah. For the Caterpillar antique belt work. And Debbie. Debbie Hale. Lucky duck. So let's welcome Pamela Gilmer, and we'll get on with it. And Pamela, let me warn you, I have a problem back here. But yeah, let's welcome Pamela Gilmer.
Well, now, first off, I'd like to thank Pamela Gilmer for loaning me this body and this voice. So could you give her a hand for doing that? Well, first off, thank you for calling me back during this spirit-filled and honored time near Halloween. Lots of folks enjoy dressing up and acting like people who crossed over. Maybe recollecting stories and haunting events from the past. I'm Edith Maxwell, and I've come here today to tell about what happened to me so many years ago on this very spot where our four-room house stood. It was right here where we're sitting. Was that a little bit scary? And that wind blowing, and these pictures moving. Well, it's just saying something to me. How many of you know something about Edith? Edith Maxwell, something's okay. When I have to say, first of all, it was a long time ago. And I've been away from here a long time. And when this happened to me, I put it behind me. My whole family put it behind. So I need some help a little bit remembering. How many of you have trouble remembering? I'm sure you understand. Well, it was 1935 and I was 21 years old, and I had completed 3 years at Radford Teachers College. I really wanted to be a nurse, but back then children were more inclined to do what their parents thought best for them, so I ended up being a teacher. I taught in a one-room schoolhouse on Mead Creek called the Mullins School. Anybody remember the Mullins School? It's just one little, they called it a tar baby shack. I had about 42 children in grades 1 through 7. It's a time when so many were destitute coming out of that Great Depression that I felt proud that I could help my family and have a little salary to bring home so they could have a better life. I was young. And like any young person, I like to have fun. It was a time when women were wearing shorter hair, shorter dresses, and even paints. Some of us were doing a little dancing, maybe smoking cigarettes. They didn't think nothing was wrong with that back then. And drinking. Yes, drinking. Prohibition had ended right close to that time, about 2 years. And places that served up alcohol were sprinkled all over Wise County. They had joints names like Joyland and Shorty's and the Rendezvous and the Ritz. I like to have fun, like I said, but I was not wild and willful like my poppy called me. We often had fights about that. He said I was staying out and running with boys and not acting like a proper teacher ought to act. I said to him that it was my business and I could do what I wanted. That there's what led us to all the trouble. You see, on that June night that changed my life forever, Poppy was the one who was doing all the drinking while he'd been drinking all day long. And what made it even worse, that he and Mommy were fighting all day. Well, they were fighting because she was intending to go out and pick berries. Well, what's wrong with that, you say? Well, what was wrong with it to Pappy was he's caught her and she was putting lipstick and powder on her face to go out to pick berries. Now, he started accusing her of meeting somebody and saying she was going out to do more than just pick berries. So you can just imagine how that went. If I had to die, my mama would sooner drown in that river than get her another man. Poppy was enough trouble for her. Well, anyhow, Mary Catherine was my 11-year-old sister. And she was telling me as soon as I got home that night past midnight that Poppy was a-fixin' to throw Mommy out the next day. Get her stuff and get out. He'd give her 30 minutes the next day. Over my dead body. He'll do no such a thing, I said to her. Well, he must have heard me saying such as that, and he proceeded to holler and yell at me that I was no more than a common slut for coming home past midnight. He was kicking Mama out in the morning and gonna whoop me tonight. This part of the story, it gets real complicated, and there's so much more that I want to tell you about. I know you came here to hear about that summer night in June when Poppy ended up dead on the back porch. But first, I'm fixing to tell you about all the things that made this more than just a story about a possible cover-up and a killing that took place. It was an event that drew nationwide attention on many different reasons. And I'd like to tell you about some of those reasons why this case ended up being known about across this country. Let's start with the fact that there were 2 accused women, not men, but women. Now, in these current times, violent crimes are frequently committed by men over women. In 1935, it was no different. The news of 2 women accused of murder caught the public's eye across the country. Made even more intriguing by the press was their depiction of a young and pretty school teacher apparently mistreated by a drunken father who blamed his daughter for committing the crime of staying out and running with boys. Well, in cities across this nation, that behavior was no more than being a modern young woman in changing times. And we got that even today, don't we? It's always a changing, and the older folks is always looking at the younger ones saying, well, in my day it weren't like that. Next thing, there was this media frenzy. This might sound a little familiar too. Now here's the first thing. It's the media. Just like today, newspapers are supposed to report the facts and stick to the facts. Now, you and me both know that that's a joke. Today, they call it fake news. But back then, it was called yellow journalism. I call it yellow because it's so cowardly for reporters to tell lies to sell news. They also called it checkbook journalism. I was bought, and my second trial was mostly paid by a Washington newspaper owned by a man with a name, William Randolph Hearst. Ever heard of him? Maybe you have. Nobody could have ever thought for a minute that that news would blow up so big across this county, across the nation. There was a little place called Wise County and a little town called Pound, and everybody come to know about it. One of the main reporters for the big-time newspaper in D.C., his name was Arthur Medford. He plumb lambasted my mama when he described her like this. He said, the tall, worn, and scrawny, aged beyond her years mate who had countenanced Trig's mistreatment for more than 50 years. Does that sound silly to you? He also claimed that around these parts of Virginia, girl children, instead of being a blessing, are considered pest critters by the illiterate, swaggering hillbilly males who, according to tradition, are born with the inherent right to dominate body and soul every action of their meek and fearful women. That's what they were saying. But Medford told a different story about me and my brother Earl. Of myself, he said, because of all my book learning, I had rebelled against my tyrant father and the illiterate women who made fun of my store-bought clothes and highfalutin city talk. Well, now, I admit, I went along with some of this by posing for pictures to build up sympathy for my case. There were pictures. Me behind looking like a maiden in distress, or me smiling sweetly as I lean on a stair post at the jailhouse in Jonesville, or me on a bench with a boy with a caption that read, love, honor, and oh baby. I was the picture of a modern post-flapper girl. The media sold those papers and sold the public the idea that I was an innocent, bright young teacher living in squalor in the backward culture where women folk had to be home before dark and follow the dictates of their men folk. In headlines, I was referred to as the Lonesome Pine Girl or the Joan of Arc of the Lonesome Pine. Of course, it was mostly lies and exaggeration, but my brother Earl, through the dark door of the press, had found an exit to save me from a future in prison for a crime I did not claim. Earl took all he could stand to Poppy by the time he was 18. Their many fights and disagreements were reaching the point I feared that something terrible was going to happen. Little did I know something terrible was going to happen, but it was going to happen to me. I was sort of relieved when Earl took off for the North. He'd not returned to Pound for several years. Well, not until Poppy died. And then he came because he wanted to help me. The news said he was a hillbilly who had courage and ambition to take himself out of the rut. Speaking of Earl. Another reporter told this a little further by saying, an entirely modern young man who rose like a knight of old to champion the cause of his beauty in distress, his sister. Well, I don't see myself as no beauty, but my brother sure was my hero. A less complimentary report of people of the Trail of the Lonesome Pine, as they called us, describing folks in our county of Wise, went like this. Slatternly women and gangling men who rise each day to take up the dull business of living. Such words to describe us. The picture of the cow on Main Street in front of the courthouse where I was tried left many of the locals feeling as though I was in favor of making folks out as ignorant mountaineers living in the backwoods of Southwest Virginia. Some say this is the reason that the 2 juries gave me the sentence of 25 years. Hollywood got in on the act too with a loosely based movie done by Warner Brothers called Mountain Justice. It was a time when it was popular to show an ordinary person in extraordinary circumstances. Well, that was me. If things had gone different, I might have played my own part. But destiny had a different idea. Reporters had a way of changing things around to suit themselves in order to sell more papers, as I done told you. One of them, named Fulton Lewis, took it upon himself to say I killed my daddy with a woman's high-heeled shoe. Well, now, I did admit hitting Poppy with his own shoe that night, but I guess he thought it would sound much more interesting to switch out the truth for a lie. I bet this notion came to him when at my trial, my lawyer showed the jury a woman's slipper and asked them if they thought that might be used as a weapon to kill a man. Let me add that back then, the heel of a woman's shoe was thick and sort of blunt-like. Not like what you call spike or pointy. A shoe like that could really do some damage to somebody's head. This shoe wasn't like that. Anyway, the media locked onto that version and come up with a name for me called Slipper Slayer. Cinderella Girl. Now let me tell you about the women's party. With the media backing me up and cashing in on selling more papers, the women's movement also wanted a piece of me to advance their agenda, taking action against an all-male jury that was a law in the state of Virginia. It was to them in opposition to having a jury of peers that naturally would include women. In fact, a business and professional women's club out of Knoxville, Tennessee, had been fundraising to help pay for my second trial. And they come to see me in jail after my first trial, but I was told I could not speak a word to them because Earl had agreed exclusive rights to my story to the Hearst newspaper, an example of checkbook journalism. The women, disgusted, returned home and returned all of the money. Later on, the National Women's Party did support my cause as well as theirs. While I was out on bail between trials, they had me some fundraisers. My backers dressed me up like a play doll beauty queen, put me in a gown, and paraded me around New York and Chicago. But the NWP held a big fancy ball at the Hotel Washington in D.C., and it was like being Cinderella. At this ball full of glamour and chandeliers, crystal, real silver, people wearing jewelry, people wearing long dresses. Oh, you could tell there was money everywhere. I was the talk of the town and treated like a celebrity more than someone facing a sentence for a killing. I signed autographs for more than 50 people in one night. Back at home in Wise, some folks was resentful about all the pictures they seen of me dressed up and posing for the camera. The media was celebrating me like I was some kind of celebrity, while the press made my home folks out to be just a bunch of country bumpkins. But there was nothing I could do about it if I was to come up with the money for my appeal and have another chance of freedom. They set my bail about $15,000, but I had what they called friends who took care of me. Now, in that second trial, the vice president of the NWP was an unlikely lawyer. I tell you, there's spirits around here today. She was an unlikely lawyer from Maine, and she came to Wise to be part of my defense team. So, this was her chance to fight for a change in the law in Virginia that kept women from serving jury duty. She was hoping my trial would end up in the Supreme Court. Gail Laughlin astounded everybody with her husky voice and her chopped off hair and her attire of a black suit and a black tie. Nobody had ever seen a woman who looked like this and spoke like that. She was also very condescending about the farm folk and went back home with her prejudice in place and still stuck on stereotypes. Even my own defense lawyer for the Commonwealth of Virginia found a reason to wait in the lobby as Laughlin gave her speech to the court. And speaking of the courtroom, if I had to die, oh Lord, I've never seen such a sight. Why, people poured into that room. They'd arrive early and bring their lunch because they didn't want to lose their seat. They didn't want to get up during no break and lose a good place to see good and hear good. Babies was a-crying and men was a-chewing and spitting, and children run up and down the aisle. Judge Skeen, white-haired and deaf in one ear from the war, pounded his hammer for order in the court throughout the day. During my stay in the jailhouse, I received all kinds of fan mail all over the country, mostly women who understood a bad time at home with a man. Somebody even sent me a canary in a cage. It was kind of confusing to me to be so hated by my own community and so loved by strangers across the country. It's the moment of truth. I'm going to tell you now. I know you've waited. You've all heard enough of this stuff. And you want to hear what really happened. Well, there's been so much guesswork about the case. If he was murdered and what the murder weapon was it an axe, an iron, a woman's shoe, a skillet? Who killed him? Me? Mummy? Both of us? Or did Trigg die of a stroke or a heart attack or a blood clot? The truth has never been uncovered. One thing we know is I did serve time, although many said the evidence was circumstantial and nothing was ever proven. In my first trial, Judge Skeen told the jury that their only chance was to vote for me to be innocent or first or second degree murder. There was no option of manslaughter at all. In my second trial, my new defense team decided not to have me or Mommy take the stand. Many thought this was their biggest mistake. Now, we ain't got time to go over all that went on during those two trials, nor try to answer all the questions I know you have. But I will describe to you the way I told it in court and the way Mommy and Mary Catherine told it too. As I told you, I went out with a boy named Raymond that night, and we had ourselves a good time down near the mud hole. Now, this was a muddy place in the Gap where wagons in the old days used to often get stuck, but it became a popular hot spot. And there was this speakeasy that sold alcohol. Although I just drank me a pop, Raymond had him a few drinks of the hard stuff. I got home sometime between midnight and 1, and I pulled my clothes off and stripped down to my princess slip, making ready for bed in the living room where I slept on the couch every night. Well, then I went into the room where Mama and her baby sister, my baby sister Mary Catherine, were. Mary Catherine began sobbing to me that Poppy was kicking Mommy out in the morning, giving her 30 minutes to get out. And she was just a-crying and a-bawling about that. And that he was going to give me a whooping for staying out so late. Well, I was telling her he would do no such a thing when he, Poppy, appeared in the doorway. and he began a-growling. A man ought to break my neck for staying out so late. A big fight ensued, and then he grabbed me by the hair and pulled me into the kitchen. We was knocking everything down, we was crashing into things, and the wash tub spilled water all over the floor. Finally, he showed me the butcher knife he picked up off the table, and I run into the dark bedroom, and I said, "Don't stab me with that knife, Poppy." I dodged. I fell over a chair, I fell in the floor, and there was something under me pushing into my back, and I pulled it out, and it was Poppy's big rubber shoe, and I began hitting him with it and hitting him with it. I was so scared. Mommy and Mary Catherine were both screaming and begging us to stop, but I just kept swinging that shoe at him, and he yelling, "Edith, I'm gonna finish you." He was holding me with his fingers poking so deep into my skin. I knew I had to get out of there, and I run out the porch door and run down the steps and hid under him. I thought of getting help, but then I thought better of it. Here I was with my slip all torn, my hair all mussed up. I was in no shape. Besides that, it was nobody's business what happened in our house. It was about that time that our neighbor, Chant Kelly, appeared and asked if things was all right. Now, Mr. Kelly was a respected businessman and very successful in Pound. You might have noticed the bridge you come over, and it's named after Chant Kelly. Unfortunately, his house had burnt down to the ground a few years previous to that, and his wife was an invalid on account of it. Well, I just couldn't think what to say to him. What came out of my mouth was, "There's no fire here, Mr. Kelly. Please go on home." Well, he went on his way. Mary Catherine come out then and told me to come back inside. Poppy was back in his room, and when I come in the house, I told Mommy that I was packing my things and getting out. I'd had enough. I couldn't take it anymore. Well, both of them commenced to crying and begging me to stay, and I said I'd stay till morning, and then I was getting out for good. I heard Poppy say something about being thirsty later, when the house got quiet and dark. I knowed he was in there, and he was mumbling sometimes. I turned on the big radio in my room, and Mama came and said, "Turn that thing off, it's bothering Trig." So I turned it off. And then it becomes so quiet in that house. So dark and so quiet. And then I heard Poppy saying, "I'm thirsty. I need to spit." And then I heard him heading through the porch. And I heard him fall. We all heard it. And we come running to see what had happened. It was a big crash. And this here is when things kindly run amok in the story. We all said he must have fallen into the meat block. His head was bleeding. And at first I thought he'd fainted, so I got me some water and throwed it on his face to wake him up. But he didn't move. It was then we all knowed that the worst had happened. Poppy was dead. Well, from that moment on, my life would never be the same. Now, there were 2 trials, long trials, and 2 years later, I lost the appeal for yet another chance in court, and Governor Peary denied clemency, despite the hundreds of letters for my support. My earlier claim to fame had dwindled. I was no longer connected to the women's movement, nor receiving their financial backing. On November 30th, at 23 years old, Earl, my brother, accompanied me to the Richmond State Penitentiary. With good behavior and credits for spent jail time, my release date was expected to be in 10 years. In December, due to overcrowding, I was sent to a brand new prison called the State Industrial Farm for Women in Goochland County near Charlottesville. I was pleased to get a job in the prison office where I learned secretarial skills. They thought I could never be no teacher anymore. So they thought maybe I could be a secretary, and I did learn how. My good news came when Mommy's charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. Maybe it was good enough to just make one of us pay. I'm glad it was me, not Mommy. In her condition, which was so weak, I doubt she would have lived through jail or prison, or even a court case. With the continued support of friends to my cause, some of them in some very high places, the newly elected Governor Price considered my case for clemency. One of the sob sisters, that's what they call women reporters, was determined to help me. Her name was Sissy Patterson, and she had bought 2 Hearst newspapers and put them into one called the Herald Times. As editor, she contacted Eleanor Roosevelt and asked her to write the governor on my behalf. She done that, as did the superintendent of the prison, who wrote an excellent report on my admirable conduct and attitude. With my new secretarial skills, I was prepared for employment and already had some very good offers from big cities. Even my defendant attorney and the Judge Carter for my second trial wrote to the governor too in my behalf, saying that they each felt that the harsh punishment did not fit the crime. I finally satisfied the governor that I had earned an early release. In December 1941, 6.5 years after it all had begun, at age 27, I was finally freed from prison and began my new life. I changed my name to Ann Grayson, Ann after my mommy, Grayson just out of the phone book. I moved away, never to return to the state of Virginia, nor Wise County, nor Pound. I married. I had 2 children. Our family put the unhappy events past us, behind us. And I'm happy to say, in the end, I had a happy life. Thank you. Thank you. I was about to get busted off the stage here with my own self. So there was still, nothing became crystallized in any of that. You know, it was just, didn't know who did it, never proved what they did it with, just a mystery. So, anybody have any questions that I can't answer? Or questions I can make up the answer? Good. Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. May Edith live. Thank you.
Well, I wonder, since we have some time, if we could persuade Frankie Taylor to come up and say a few words. And wasn't that wonderful? We must have Pam back again, Pamela back again. So glad you showed up.
Hello, everybody.
Hey!
Wasn't that wonderful? I mean, really, I try to make a living doing stuff like that, and she's great. You know, not all this little nuance and inflection and and you know, little grunts and groans and chuckling, laughing and stuff, you know, was pretty daggone good. So a lot of times if I say a few words or something, it just depends on how much coffee I've had. I've not had any coffee, so this is, what's that? No, you'll never get me off. So this is a pretty wonderful thing that, you know, that y'all are doing here, and telling these old stories and about things that have gone on, and then the place where they happened. And I was glad to be over here and see you all again. One of the last times that we did Red Fox was out at the school out here, and it was part of the Historical Society doing stuff. And I remember there was a lady brought a shirt, an old shirt that had blood on it that was part of the story. And so things like that happened, and so it was a big part of my life, us traveling around doing Red Fox all over the country, and I never knew exactly what the appeal of it was to people in New York City or Mormons out in Utah, and but ultimately I think that it was because every little town in America, maybe all over the world, something has happened locally, and it's a local story, and people tell it to themselves. And that's all we did. We just took a local story and got all the details in it, and then, you know, made a play out of it, and it worked. And a lot of people enjoyed it. I know we did. So anyway, that's enough words. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excuse me, can I say one thing?
Yes, please.
I wanted to tell y'all this story. I taught drama. Thank you.
I taught drama at Pound High School. I told them that place was going to fall apart when I left. But anyway, maybe some of you all saw the video of the Edith Maxwell story.
Last night.
Good. I had 5 students who told this story, and they changed parts, did all kinds of parts. Anyway, one of the things we did in preparing for that was go to a nursing home somewhere around here. I don't even remember where it was. But we went and talked to this very old woman who was bedridden, and she told us that she remembered the story, and that when she was a little girl, she was so afraid because the newspaper people were all over the place. And they were walking through people's yards and just taking just really making themselves known. And she was a little girl. She said it scared her so much. And she heard about Edith hitting her daddy with that shoe. So her whole life, she always kept a high-heeled shoe under her bed. I love that. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you that because it's fun.
Where's Debbie? Debbie.
She went to get something out of it.
Of course. Okay, it's just a few minutes. We got about 10 minutes to 5, and we wanted to invite those of you who are up for it to go up to the Pound Gap there on the left, where at the trailhead of where you can go to Pine Mountain, or you can walk down the Red Fox Trail, the Killing Rock Trail, and walk on down and find you a rock and sit down by the Killing Rock site. Kenny Mullins is there, and he's got something he wants to talk to y'all about. There'll be a bonfire built, and good company and good story, and the rain's not coming till a lot later. I can't speak for the wind though. But anyway, be there at the Killing Rock by 6. Okay, Bill Gillum.
Hey guys, I just want to thank everyone for attending this wonderful event. I want to thank in public Margaret Sturgill. If it wasn't for Margaret, none of this would have been happening, I promise you that. And Marley, where's Marley? Marley here. And my friend Finley Jackson, who helped with all the renovation of this place and everything like that, guys. And if anybody tells you you can't do something, you know, you can do it. It just takes a community and some good hearts, and you can get a lot done. And Annie Milburn, Buchanan Milburn, we want to thank her as well in public. And thank y'all for coming, and keep coming. Margaret says this will be an annual event. It's amazing. I mean, just months ago, this place was just a graveled old gas station that no one cared about. And the Historical Society took it on, and we got it done. So thank you, Margaret, for everything. Love you, Margaret.
You remember that?